your skill set, your investigative techniques. And it reminds me a lot of Lee Strobel, who was an investigative reporter for the Chicago Tribune, as I recall.
Right.
So he took that same skill set and he was going to disprove, in his case, he wanted to disprove the faith of his wife. But you weren't going out to disprove it.
No.
You were saying, well, let's look at it as though this were what?
Yeah, well, my son and I just had this conversation. He's also a detective, and he was raised in the faith, 3 generations, all named Jim Wallace.
That's
at the same agency. So there's been a Jim Wallace at that agency since 1961. Anyway, we're on this call yesterday. I realized it was 2 hours and 47 minutes that Jimmy and I were talking about the theological history of different ideas in Christendom, different theological ideas. He's interested in authority. Like, how do we know this canon is the canon, or ought to be the canon? Or do we leave anything out? Should something else be included? That's always Jimmy's thing, right? He's been interested in that. Okay, well, for me, it was kind of similar. I wasn't sure. I had no upbringing in the church, so I didn't know anything about, like, how were these books selected? What's the Bible? What's the history? Didn't care. Here's what I knew. This pastor said that Jesus was smart, and that was enough to provoke me to buy a Bible, to see what's so smart about Jesus. So I bought a pew Bible. They were like $6 or $7 at B. Dalton, back when they had bookstores. Yeah. So I buy this pew Bible and I get it home and I'm reading through the Gospels, looking for the red letters.
You knew to go to the Gospels first.
Well, I knew that because he had quoted in this thing something from the Gospel, in this message at church, something from the Gospels. So I started there, just where he had talked about. And I looked and okay. Didn't know how the structure of this text was. Didn't know what a gospel was compared to the letters of Paul. I didn't know any of that. But I did know, as I read through these gospels, that they varied. Like the same event is being described in what some people might say are 2 different ways. And they might even say they're contradictory. Now, I didn't take that view because I've been working with eyewitnesses for a number of years by that time. And if you get 5 eyewitnesses to describe something that happened just 15 minutes ago, you will see the same level of variation between a 15-minute-old event. This is just the nature of eyewitnesses. We disagree typically because we come in with certain commitments to reality that drive our observations. So if I'm somebody who loves 1960s cinema, I'll probably remember everything on that poster on that wall that somebody else, there was a poster on the wall?
Right.
I think there was a mirror on the wall. I wasn't paying attention.
Yeah.
Well, no, there's actually a poster from a night. Really? These seem like 2 contradictory. Well, it's because I am committed to certain things that I'm interested in.
It's interesting you saw that without even having a basic understanding of, because the Gospels, as you know now, are written from 4 different perspectives.
Exactly.
Matthew speaking more to the Jewish mindset,
Right.
and John maybe to more what we would call secular view. These things we write that you may believe that Jesus is the Son of God.
Yes.
So he's effectively wanting to bring non-believers to faith. Where Matthew, it's like lots of Old Testament references and showing how Jesus fulfilled all these things. So, but both inspired by God.
Right.
I see it as sort of looking at the same thing from different angles.
Well, look at it this way. If I'm doing an interview, I'm interviewing a boomer or maybe a Gen X about what was he wearing, I'm far more likely to get better information from a woman than I am from a guy.
Yes.
It's just, if it's in that generation. So it's because the commitments of each person, the interests of each group, and it changes generationally. There are different things that you're interested in. And if you're somebody, for example, who just by coincidence happened to own the same brand shirt, so you can tell me, no, I know what he was wearing. I own that shirt. I got it at LL Bean.
Yeah.
It's an LL Bean shirt. Well, that's great information to have, right? Because when I do a search warrant, I know what I'm looking for now. But I may not get that unless you happen to have a personal history that causes you to pin on the shirt he's wearing.
Right.
But that also means you probably missed that thing standing over there because you were looking over here. So your prior interests dictate the way you see an environment. It's not just that I might describe it differently, it's that I missed it altogether. One of the things that's dangerous, I think, about videos for police officers, and I'm in favor of body cams because I think they're generally help us more than they hurt us. But one of the worst things about body cams is that they're not discriminatory. The same way you develop tunnel vision, especially if you're in a crisis traumatic moment. I will start to not see the things in my periphery because I'm so focused on the danger. That the camera doesn't do that. When you play it the next day, it sees everything as if it has the same level of attention. And then you could ask the officer, why didn't you see that? Well, I don't know. I just know in real time, all I could see is this. Even though, is that available to you? Yes. but I couldn't see it because of other issues that caused me to focus in. Well, the same is true for any set of eyewitnesses, even if it's something like your grandmother's birthday. If you're going to go and you're bored to tears, you're going to have a different report of that birthday than somebody who's animated about the gifts that she got. You probably couldn't even tell me half the gifts she got, but somebody else could. And it's not because we weren't there. It's because we were there and we're two different people. So when I read through the Gospels for the first time, I thought, oh, there's like an embedded flavor here that feels like I would expect it to feel. Because certainly they had centuries to work these issues out. If they wanted to eliminate the differences between the Gospels, it could have been done before any of us would ever be the wiser.
Right.
But they left them in because this is the nature of eyewitness accounts. So I thought, okay, and I say eyewitness accounts, here's why. Well, John has historically been attributed as the writer of the Gospel of John, and Matthew has historically been attributed, that Gospel has been attributed to Matthew. But Mark, I think there's an entire line of good evidence that is Peter's Gospel,
Yes.
written in Rome. I think it's the first Gospel, and I can make that case later. But the point is, it's an eyewitness account recorded by Mark. It's Peter's eyewitness account, and Luke tells us that he is writing the eyewitness accounts of others, eyewitnesses and servants of the word. Well,
He
look,
interviewed people.
right. Well, let's put it this way. When I get a case, I get a bunch of supplemental reports that contain eyewitness accounts. Well, you know that none of them were actually written by the eyewitness. They're written by detectives who interviewed an eyewitness. So they're still eyewitness accounts, even though they're not written by the eyewitness. They're written by somebody who has access to the eyewitness. So I look at Mark and Luke, and I jump them in. So I can now test these, given all the parameters we use in criminal trials to test eyewitnesses. And there's
What was the turning point? Like, what did a light go on, or all of a sudden that this is it, or was it a little more gradual?
It was more gradual. Even like any case I work, I don't have a lot of DNA cases. Just that one I told you about with that 10-year-old. That's the only DNA case I've ever had in cold cases. I make cases by a mass quantity, a cumulative circumstantial case. It's 50 things. It's death by 1,000 paper cuts. It's 50 things that point to that guy. Now, any one of those 50 things might not seem like much, but in total, it's like, oh yeah, this is overwhelming. Who else could it be that could meet all of these 50 conditions? Well, so it's small little pieces of evidence that don't seem like much on their own that point back to the same suspect. That's all my cases. So here it was the same thing. At some point the body of evidences was overwhelming to me, and each one of them might seem like a little bit of nothing. So you can look at the archaeological support. You can look at the fact that the language is consistent with people who would write in the first century in that region. Even the use of pronouns, these are all consistent. There's lots of different lines of evidence you could look at. Now, here's what I would say is the deal killer for most people. And there's these 4 criteria that I've talked about in cold case Christianity. Were they really there to see what they said they saw? Have they changed their story over time? Can they be corroborated even in a small way? And finally, do they have a bias that would cause them to lie to us? That's how we test all eyewitnesses in jury trials. You could apply that template to the Gospels. You'd be surprised where they land. But there's a lot of skeptics out there, and they're typically skeptical because the Gospels contain miracles. Supernatural events. Let's put it this way. If the Gospels were just a story about a first century rabbi who had great sermons, nice guy, never worked a miracle, but not born of a virgin, never rose from the grave, just a smart preaching rabbi, nobody would doubt the historicity of the Gospels based on the fact we have so much overwhelming manuscript evidence. Nobody would doubt anything. There's no better ancient attested on manuscript evidence than Jesus of Nazareth. But if you insert one miracle, just one, everyone says, oh, that's got to be out. I'm out. So that tells you right now that this is not about the manuscript evidence or the historical evidence. It's about a presuppositional bias against the supernatural.
Right.
Because people don't think the supernatural exists in a modern world. They'll say, hey, if you're doing history and you're going to insert something supernatural, you're no longer in the right genre. You're not in history. Now you're in mythology.
Yeah.
You just shifted. Because we don't have room for the supernatural in history any more than we have room for the supernatural in science. So we've naturalized, we've kind of stripped out anything beyond the physical realm in both history and science. And there's the question I have. There's people we know, intellectuals in culture today who have big podcast audiences who really kind of deny supernatural claims. Yet they think they are considering this notion with their immaterial mind we're more than just brains.
Yeah.
We have immaterial minds. We're more than just bodies. We're soulish creatures. Well, how do we explain the soulish nature or the immaterial mind in an entirely physical universe? There has to be something beyond pure physicalism. There has to be.